The road to civil war. In 1619, the English settlers from Virginia purchased 20 blacks from a Dutch ship. When they were sold as indentured servants and not as slaves. An indentured servant meant that they could work for an amount of time then basically retire. However, this did not last long. Soon they were all sold into a lifetime of slavery. 1776, in July, the colonies adopted the Declaration of Independence, which freed them from the English rule. The Declaration of Independence was written by Thomas Jefferson, and in it stated, "All men are created equal." Although most of the men that signed the Declaration had slaves. 1787. It was debated whether the Congress should stop importing slaves. Committee members of Georgia and South Carolina said their states would not join the new union if they stopped slave trade. In July, Congress passed the Northwest Ordinance, in which the new federal territories did not have slavery. In 1790, Congress ordered for there to be a census. The population was 3,863,874, which 18% of that was slaves. 43% of Carolina were slaves. 39% of Virginia were slaves. 30% of Georgia were slaves. In 1800, a new census was done. The population was 5,084,912, with 17% of slaves. Slaves basically did not exist in the northern states. However, 92% of South Carolina were slaves and 39% of Virginia were slaves. In March 1807, Congress passed laws which banned new slaves from being imported into the United States and became effective January 1st, 1808. The outcome of the 1810 census was 6,807,786, with 17% of that slaves. In fact, the northern states didn't have many slaves. However, South Carolina had 40 slaves and Virginia had 42 slaves. The outcome of the 1820 census was 10,037,323, in which 15% of that were slaves. In the northern states still remained almost slave-free. South Carolina had 51% slaves and Louisiana had 41% slaves. In March, the Missouri Compromise negotiated, which allowed Maine to be admitted into the Union as a free state. Missouri also admitted into the Union as a slave state in 1821. This decision made a balance between a free state and slave states. The compromise states that the 36° 30 parallel of latitude was as a dividing line, which separated free areas from slave areas. In May, Maine also joined the Union as a free state. In 1828, Congress and tariff of the administrations raised tariffs. The tariffs were made by America to support the northern economy. Also, tariffs damaged the northern agricultural economy, which supported slavery. In 1830, the outcome of the census was 12,754,289, in which 16% of that were slaves. Slaves are still vague in the northern states. 50% of South Carolina were slaves, and 51% of Louisiana were slaves. In 1850, Congress passed the Kansas-Nebraska Act, which overruled the Missouri Compromise. Therefore, the northern territories were now open to slavery. This resulted in people in the southern territories and the people from the northern territories to move up there and set a future for the land. In 1857, Congress passed the Tariff of 1857, whereas it lowered the rates as much as 20%. This was highly disliked in the North and highly appreciated in the South. In March is when the Dred Scott decision happened. The Supreme Court ruled in Scott versus Sanford, in which stated that blacks were not citizens and that slaveholders could take their slaves into free land. 1860. In November of 1860, Abraham Lincoln was elected president. In December, South Carolina secedes from the Union. 1861. In January of 1861, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, Kansas secede from the Union. In February, Texas secedes from the Union as well, and Jefferson Davis elected president for the Confederate States. In March, Lincoln was inaugurated as the 16th president, and the Confederate Army is created out of volunteers. On April 12th, the Civil War began.